A waitress approached a millionaire and told him not to close a deal with his best friend. The next morning, there was a luxury car near her humble home. David Sullivan adjusted his cufflinks as he glanced around the luxurious café. This was supposed to be a celebratory day. He and his best friend, Ryan, were about to finalize one of the biggest deals of their lives. A deal that would solidify their company's place at the top of the industry and ensure their financial success for years to come. The cafe buzzed with the low hum of conversation, clinking silverware, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Everything seemed perfect. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. "Ryan, I'm going to use the restroom real quick," David said, standing from the polished mahogany table. Ryan, who had been scrolling through his phone, barely looked up, nodding absent-mindedly. David walked away, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Years of hard work had led to this moment. He had built his empire alongside Ryan, and together, they were about to close a deal that would elevate them to new heights. But while David was away, the atmosphere at the table shifted. Emily, a young waitress who had been serving their table, approached to refill Ryan's glass of water. She had been working at the cafe for a few months, always keeping her head down, never interfering in the conversations of the wealthy clientele who frequented the place. Today, however, was different. As she approached the table, she overheard a conversation that made her stop in her tracks. Ryan, thinking no one was paying attention, was speaking quietly into his phone. His words sent a chill down Emily's spine. "Everything's set. David has no idea. Once the deal goes through, I'll have control of everything. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. I've been planning this for months. The company, the assets, it's all going to be mine." Emily's hand trembled slightly, almost spilling the water as she quickly stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Ryan, the man who was supposed to be David's closest friend and business partner, was planning to betray him and take everything they had built together. She quickly retreated to the kitchen, trying to process what she had just overheard. She had no personal stake in this. After all, she was just a waitress. But something about the situation gnawed at her conscience. Could she really just walk away and pretend she hadn't heard anything? Moments later, David returned to the table, completely unaware of the treacherous conversation that had taken place in his absence. Ryan greeted him with a smile, masking his true intentions. Emily watched from a distance, her mind racing. She had always been someone who kept to herself, but this was different. She couldn't just stand by and watch an innocent man get ruined by his own best friend. Gathering all the courage she could muster, Emily decided she had to act. As Ryan excused himself to take a call outside, Emily saw her chance. Taking a deep breath, she walked over to David's table, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Excuse me, Mr. Sullivan?" she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. David looked up, surprised that the waitress was addressing him directly. "Yes?" Emily hesitated, her pulse racing. But there was no turning back now. "I overheard something you need to know," she said, glancing nervously toward the door where Ryan had stepped outside. David frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "Your friend, Ryan. I think he's planning to betray you. I heard him talking on the phone, saying he's going to take everything from you once the deal is finalized." David blinked, taken aback by her words. His immediate instinct was to dismiss her. This was Ryan, his closest friend, someone he had trusted for years. Why would she even suggest such a thing? I'm sorry, what?" David asked, trying to process what he had just heard. His voice held a mix of confusion and disbelief. "I know this sounds crazy, but I swear I'm telling the truth," Emily continued, her voice urgent. "I heard him say it himself. He's planning to take over your company and leave you with nothing." David's initial shock began to melt into suspicion. Could this really be true? Was it possible that the man he had trusted for so long was planning such a betrayal? He glanced toward the door where Ryan was still on the phone, Doubt crept into his mind, gnawing at the confidence he had always had in his friend. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his tone more serious now. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with sincerity. "I wouldn't be telling you this if I wasn't. I couldn't let you go into that deal without knowing what I heard." David sat back, his mind racing. He had known Ryan since they were kids. They had built this company from the ground up together. The idea that Ryan would betray him was almost unfathomable. But something about Emily's demeanor made him pause. She didn't seem like someone who would lie about something like this. "Thank you," David finally said, his voice quieter now. "I appreciate you telling me this." Emily nodded and quickly retreated, leaving David alone with his thoughts. The celebration that had seemed so certain minutes ago now felt fragile, on the verge of collapsing. David glanced at the contract on the table, his mind torn. If what Emily had said was true, then signing this deal could be the biggest mistake of his life. He had to be sure. He had to find out the truth. And as Ryan re-entered the cafe, smiling as if nothing had happened, David knew one thing for certain. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his best friend, without knowing all the facts. David sat at the table, his mind swirling with doubt and confusion. He watched Ryan walk back toward him, smiling as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath David's feet. Emily's words echoed in his head. "He's planning to take over your company and leave you with nothing." It was impossible to reconcile this accusation with the person who had just rejoined him at the table. "Everything all right?" Ryan asked casually as he took his seat again, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside David. David forced a smile, though his stomach churned with uncertainty. "Yeah, just thinking over the deal. You know how it is," he said, his voice as calm as he could manage. Ryan nodded, taking a sip of his water. "I get it. Big decisions. But we've been working toward this for years. It's time to make it official." David nodded absent-mindedly, staring down at the papers laid out before him. They had spent years building this business, and now they were on the brink of expanding it even further. But the words of a waitress, someone he had never met before today, had thrown everything into chaos. Could Ryan really be capable of such betrayal? The thought gnawed at him. They had been through so much together. David wanted to believe it was impossible, that Emily had misheard or misunderstood something. But the sincerity in her voice, the urgency in her warning, made it difficult to brush off. "I'm thinking I need a little more time," David said slowly, his eyes still on the contract. Ryan's brow furrowed slightly. "More time?" "David, we've been over this deal for weeks. We're ready." "I know," David replied, his voice measured. "But I just want to make sure everything's in order." "No harm in double-checking, right?" There was a brief flicker of something in Ryan's expression. Was it frustration? Annoyance? David couldn't be sure, but it was enough to reinforce the growing doubt in his mind. "Of course," Ryan said, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Whatever you need, but I think we're in a good place. This deal could change everything for us." David forced another smile. "Exactly. Which is why I need to be certain." Ryan leaned back in his chair, seemingly unfazed, though David could feel the subtle shift in his demeanor. "Take your time, but don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." David nodded, his decision already made. He wasn't going to sign anything until he had more information. "I'll let you know soon," he said, standing up to leave. Ryan stayed seated, still smiling. But David couldn't shake the feeling that the dynamic between them had changed in that moment. There was a tension now, a hidden edge to Ryan's words that hadn't been there before. David walked out of the cafe, his thoughts a jumble of suspicion, disbelief, and worry. He didn't want to believe that his best friend could betray him, but he also knew he couldn't afford to be naive. Too much was at stake. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, Emily was waiting near the entrance, her expression anxious. She looked up as he approached, biting her lip nervously. "Did you talk to him?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. David paused, not wanting to reveal too much just yet. "I didn't sign anything," he said, "but I need to find out more." Emily nodded, relief washing over her face. "I was so worried. I didn't know if you'd believe me." David studied her for a moment. "Why did you tell me?" Emily hesitated, looking down at her shoes for a moment before meeting his eyes. "I know it wasn't my place. I'm just a waitress. But when I heard what he said, I couldn't let you go through with it without warning you. It didn't seem right." Her honesty was disarming. She had nothing to gain from telling him this, yet she had taken the risk anyway. David could see that she had been genuinely concerned for him, and that only deepened his confusion. "I appreciate it," he said finally. "You might have saved me from making a huge mistake." Emily shifted awkwardly, clearly not used to this kind of attention. "I'm just glad I could help." David nodded, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He knew he needed more than just a warning to act. He needed proof. "I'm going to hire someone to look into it," David said, more to himself than to Emily. "I can't make any decisions until I know for sure." Emily looked relieved that he was taking her seriously. "That's probably smart. I hope it's not true, for your sake." David gave her a tight smile. "Me too." As David walked away, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There was one person he knew could help him get to the bottom of this. A private investigator he had used in the past for business matters. He dialed the number and waited for the line to pick up. "Julian, it's David Sullivan," he said when the voice on the other end answered. "I've got a situation, and I need your help." Over the next few minutes, David explained the conversation he'd had with Emily and his growing concerns about Ryan. Julian listened carefully, asking a few pointed questions, then agreed to start looking into Ryan's finances immediately. "I'll see what I can find," Julian said. "Give me a couple of days." David hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. He had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth, but now came the hard part: waiting. As he headed back to his car, David couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting Ryan to emerge from the café and confront him. But the door remained closed, and the street was quiet. For now, he was in the dark, but soon he would know everything. David spent the next few days in a state of restless anticipation. Every interaction with Ryan felt like it was tinged with hidden meanings, as though every word from his best friend could be part of the plot Emily had warned him about. But Ryan, ever the charming partner, showed no outward signs of deception. If he was scheming behind David's back, he was doing a masterful job of hiding it. Meanwhile, David's private investigator, Julian, was digging into Ryan's financial records. David had only trusted Julian with delicate business matters a few times in the past, but he had always been thorough. Now that thoroughness was essential. As the days passed, David tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. He met with Ryan for routine business discussions, attended board meetings, and even joined him for drinks one evening to keep up appearances. All the while, his mind was buzzing with suspicion, watching Ryan closely for any slip-up, any sign that Emily's warning was true. But Ryan remained the same affable, confident man he had always been, which only served to deepen David's internal conflict. On the third day, Julian called. "I've got something," Julian said, his voice steady but serious. "It's not much, but it's a start." David, sitting at his desk, immediately straightened. "What did you find?" "There are some irregularities in Ryan's personal accounts, a few unexplained transfers over the past several months. He's been moving money into an offshore account. It's not illegal by itself, but the timing is interesting. Right around the time you two started negotiating this new deal." David's stomach clenched. "How much money are we talking about?" "Not huge sums, but enough to make you wonder. I'm still looking for more details, but it's clear he's been setting something up behind the scenes." David leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Do you think it's connected to what Emily heard?" "It's possible," Julian replied. "People don't just start moving money like this for no reason. especially not offshore. It's usually to hide something or to prepare for a major shift. My guess is he's positioning himself to make a big move once the deal goes through. David closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Emily had been right. Ryan was up to something, and if Julian's suspicions were correct, it was far worse than David had imagined. "Keep digging," David said finally. "I need more than suspicions. I need proof." "I'll keep you updated," Julian said before hanging up. David put the phone down and stared out the large window of his office, his view of the city skyline doing little to calm his racing thoughts. How had things come to this? Ryan had been by his side through thick and thin, through the highs and lows of building their business. They had celebrated their successes together and mourned their failures together. And yet, now it seemed that Ryan had been planning his betrayal for months, quietly shifting money in preparation for a takeover. David's anger began to simmer. He had trusted Ryan with everything. They had built this company together. To think that Ryan would betray him, just for a larger slice of the pie, it was almost unthinkable. Almost. The anger burned even hotter when David thought about what Ryan had said at the cafe, the casual confidence in his voice as he planned to take everything from David. How long had Ryan felt this way? Had he always been envious of David's success, secretly plotting his downfall while pretending to be his closest friend? Later that evening, David met with Ryan for dinner. It was a regular occurrence for them, a chance to discuss business in a more relaxed setting. But tonight, David's heart pounded with the weight of what he now knew. Ryan was already seated when David arrived. He greeted David with the same easy smile, but as David sat down across from him, he couldn't help but see Ryan in a different light. This wasn't just his best friend anymore. This was a man who had been plotting to take everything from him. They exchanged pleasantries, talked about the day's meetings, and discussed a few potential business leads. Ryan, as always, was charming and persuasive, talking about their future as if nothing had changed. "So, what's the latest on the deal?" Ryan asked casually between bites of his steak. "We still moving forward with the timeline?" David paused for a moment, watching Ryan carefully before responding. "I'm still reviewing a few things," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "I want to make sure everything's lined up before we finalize." Ryan's eyes flickered with something. Was it impatience? Annoyance? David couldn't be sure. But then the easy smile returned. "Of course," Ryan said smoothly. "No rush. I just don't want us to miss out on this opportunity." David nodded, his expression giving nothing away. But inside, he was seething. How could Ryan sit there, pretending everything was fine, knowing what he had planned? Knowing he was going to steal everything they had worked for. The rest of the dinner passed uneventfully, but David's resolve was only growing stronger. He couldn't confront Ryan yet, not until Julian had more concrete proof. But he knew, deep down, that the friendship he once cherished was already over. There was no going back now. That night, as David lay in bed, unable to sleep, he thought about Emily. Her warning had saved him from making the biggest mistake of his life. But now, he had to figure out how to protect what was his without tipping his hand too early. Ryan was playing a dangerous game, and David needed to be ready for whatever came next. The next morning, David woke up with a heaviness in his chest that hadn't subsided since his last dinner with Ryan. He replayed every detail in his mind, the smiles, the reassurances, the subtle impatience. How long had Ryan been planning this? David found it impossible to focus on anything else. His mind was filled with thoughts of the man who had once been his closest ally and was now, undoubtedly, his greatest enemy. By midday, David received a call from Julian. His heart rate quickened as he answered, the hope for more clarity overriding the dread he felt. "David," Julian began, his voice measured but carrying a weight of urgency. "I've uncovered more. I think we're looking at the full picture now." David sat up straighter in his chair. "What did you find?" "There's been a pattern of transactions over the past year. money being funneled out of the company in small, carefully planned increments, just below the threshold that would trigger internal flags. It's clear Ryan has been moving these funds into a personal offshore account. He's already siphoned off more than you realize. David's stomach lurched. How much are we talking? Millions, Julian replied bluntly. Close to 5 million, all hidden in accounts that would be difficult to trace if we hadn't caught this early. He's been setting this up for a long time, David. David felt the floor beneath him drop out. $5 million. It was an unimaginable betrayal, not just because of the money, but because of the scope. Ryan had been planning this, little by little, for over a year. He wasn't just taking advantage of an opportunity. He had been carefully orchestrating this downfall the whole time. Julian continued. I also found some communications that suggest Ryan has been speaking with some of your business competitors. It looks like he's positioning himself to make a major play, possibly to take control of the company once this deal goes through. If you had signed the papers, you would have been handing everything over to him. David's blood ran cold. All the signs had been there, but he had ignored them, blinded by trust in history. Ryan had been positioning himself for months, building his network, diverting funds, and setting the stage for a full-blown takeover. And David had been none the wiser. David, you need to act fast, Julian said, his voice hardening. This isn't just a few bad decisions. This is deliberate, calculated fraud. If you don't stop him now, he's going to make his move. David gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. What do we do? He asked, though his mind was already racing with ideas. Julian was calm, professional. First, you need to freeze the accounts he's been using. We have enough evidence to justify it. Then, confront him, but do it strategically. Don't let him know everything you have until you're ready to force his hand. David nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. I'll talk to my legal team right away. I need to make sure the company's protected before I confront him. Good, Julian replied. I'll send you all the documentation I've gathered. You'll have everything you need to back this up legally. After the call ended, David sat back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. It was all so much to process. Ryan, the money, the betrayal. A year of carefully planned deceit, all while David had trusted him implicitly. The rage simmered just beneath the surface, but he couldn't let it cloud his judgment. He had to be smart about this. Ryan wasn't just a friend turned traitor. He was a formidable opponent who had been playing a long game. But now, David had the upper hand. He quickly called his legal team, detailing everything Julian had uncovered. His attorneys immediately began drafting the necessary documents to freeze the accounts and prevent Ryan from accessing any more company funds. David felt a surge of relief knowing that, for now, he could stop Ryan from causing further damage. But that relief was short-lived. The next step was confronting Ryan, and David knew it wouldn't be easy. Ryan was cunning, manipulative, and worst of all, had no idea David was onto him. As the day wore on, David's resolve hardened. He was going to confront Ryan, but he needed to do it on his terms. If Ryan had been plotting this betrayal for over a year, then David had to be prepared for anything. That evening, David arranged to meet Ryan at a private office space they often used for confidential discussions. The setting felt right for what was coming, neutral, professional, and away from prying eyes. Ryan arrived as scheduled, greeting David with the same easy charm that now felt like poison. "Hey, man," Ryan said with a grin as he walked in. "I've been thinking about the deal, how close we are to making it official." David forced himself to remain calm. He gestured toward the chairs. "Have a seat. We need to talk." Ryan's smile faltered slightly as he took a seat across from David, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What's going on? Something wrong?" David stared at him for a long moment, the weight of their history crashing against the reality of the present. He could still hardly believe that the man sitting across from him, someone he had trusted for most of his life, was capable of such betrayal. "I know everything, Ryan," David said finally, his voice steady but laced with anger. The offshore accounts, the stolen money, the plans you've been making behind my back. Ryan's face blanched, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, David. You've been working too hard. Maybe you're imagining things. David's eyes narrowed. I hired a private investigator. We've got the evidence, every transfer, every communication. You've been planning this for over a year. The room was thick with tension. Ryan's confident facade cracked for just a moment, revealing the truth beneath. He had been caught. The tension in the room was palpable. Ryan sat across from David, the confident smirk that usually graced his face slowly fading. He was calculating his next move, but David had cornered him. The moment had finally come. David's anger simmered beneath the surface, but he kept his voice steady. I trusted you, Ryan. We've built this company together, and now you've been siphoning money, positioning yourself to take everything. How long have you been planning this? Ryan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, trying to maintain a facade of nonchalance. David, you're blowing this out of proportion. Whatever you think you've discovered, it's not what it looks like. David scoffed, unable to believe Ryan was still trying to play games. Not what it looks like. I've seen the transfers, Ryan. Millions of dollars. You've been moving money into offshore accounts, making deals with our competitors behind my back. This isn't a misunderstanding. You've been planning to take over the company, and you thought I wouldn't notice. Ryan's face hardened. The charm he usually wore like armor was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. All right, he said, his voice dropping its usual warmth. You want the truth? Fine. Yeah, I've been planning this. You didn't leave me much choice, David. David's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Ryan leaned forward, his tone bitter. Do you have any idea what it's been like? Standing by your side, watching you take all the glory while I get the scraps. We started this company together, but you've always been the golden boy, the one everyone praises. I've been the one doing the dirty work, making sure everything runs smoothly while you get the credit. David stared at him, a mixture of shock and disgust bubbling up inside him. That's what this is about. Your ego? You think you deserve more, so you decide to steal from me, from the company we built. Ryan's voice grew harsher, his frustration boiling over. It's not about stealing. It's about what's fair. I put just as much into this company as you did, but you're the one everyone looks to. You're the one people respect. I'm just the guy in the background. I'm done with that. David's anger flared. You think this justifies stealing millions, destroying everything we've worked for? I would have been willing to talk about restructuring, about giving you more recognition, but you chose to betray me instead. Ryan's eyes flashed with resentment. Talk. You wouldn't have done anything. You've always kept me in your shadow, and I wasn't going to wait any longer. I deserve more, and I was going to take it. David shook his head in disbelief. You're unbelievable. All of this because of jealousy. I never once thought of you as beneath me, Ryan. We were partners. But you... David paused, the weight of betrayal crushing him. You ruined it. You destroyed everything because of your own insecurities. Ryan's expression darkened. You don't get it, do you? I didn't have a choice. I've been putting up with this for too long. This deal was my way out. I was finally going to get what I deserved. David stood up, his hands clenched into fists. No, Ryan, you weren't going to get anything. You thought you could take over, but I've already frozen the accounts. I have the evidence, and I'm not letting you destroy what we built. Ryan's eyes widened in shock. You... what? I've already spoken to the legal team. Your accounts are frozen. You can't access any more of the money you've been siphoning off. For the first time, true fear flickered across Ryan's face. He stood abruptly, his voice rising in panic. You can't do that. This was supposed to be my chance. I've been planning this for too long. David remained calm, his voice steady. It's over, Ryan. You've been caught. There's no way out of this. You've betrayed me, the company, and yourself. Ryan's face contorted with rage. "You think you've won, don't you? You think freezing my accounts is enough? I have connections, David. You have no idea what you're up against." David met his gaze evenly. "I know exactly what I'm up against. And I'm not afraid of you or your so-called connections. You're finished, Ryan." Ryan took a step back, his bravado crumbling as the reality of the situation set in. He was trapped, and he knew it. His years of planning, his meticulous scheme to take over the company, it was all unraveling before his eyes. "You'll regret this," Ryan muttered, his voice low and filled with venom. "You'll regret coming after me." David didn't flinch. "I regret trusting you. I regret ever considering you a friend." With that, Ryan stormed out of the room, leaving David standing alone in the empty office. The weight of the confrontation pressed down on him, but there was also a sense of relief. He had taken the first step toward protecting his company, his legacy, but the cost had been high, higher than he could have ever imagined. David sat back down at the table, his head in his hands. The betrayal cut deep, but there was no time for self-pity. He had to focus on moving forward, on rebuilding what Ryan had tried to destroy. As he sat there, the door opened quietly, and Emily stepped into the room. She had been waiting outside, sensing that something important was happening. She approached cautiously, her expression filled with concern. "David?" she asked softly. David looked up, his face weary but resolute. "It's done. Ryan's gone." Emily hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from him. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice full of sympathy. David nodded slowly. "I should have seen it coming. I trusted him, and he betrayed me." Emily placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You did what you had to do. You stopped him before it was too late." David took a deep breath, trying to let go of the weight that had settled on his chest. "Thanks to you." Emily gave him a small smile. "I'm just glad I could help." They sat in silence for a moment, the reality of the situation sinking in. David knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be legal battles, fallout from Ryan's actions, and the challenge of rebuilding the company's reputation. But for the first time in days, David felt a glimmer of hope. With Emily by his side, he wasn't facing this alone. The next morning, David sat at his desk, still absorbing the events of the previous day. Ryan was gone, his betrayal revealed, and his plan to take over the company was in ruins. It felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off David's shoulders, but the aftermath of it all lingered like a dark cloud. The betrayal hurt more than he had anticipated, and though he had stopped Ryan, the emotional toll weighed heavily on him. As he stared out the window, watching the city's skyline, his mind kept returning to one thought: Emily. The young waitress who had risked everything to tell him the truth. Without her, David would likely have signed the deal, unknowingly handing his company to Ryan. She had saved him from losing everything. David knew he couldn't just move forward without acknowledging what Emily had done for him. He had to thank her, not just with words, but by offering her something in return. Her courage had changed everything for him. He picked up his phone and dialed the café where Emily worked. When the manager picked up, David asked if Emily was working that day. After a few moments of waiting, the manager informed him that Emily wasn't on shift. David decided he would go see her in person. Later that afternoon, David drove to the modest neighborhood where Emily lived. The area was a stark contrast to the luxury he was accustomed to. Small homes lined up in neat rows, with narrow streets and aging cars parked in front. It reminded him that not everyone lived in the world of power and wealth that he did. He parked his car and approached the small, weathered house Emily shared with her mother. David took a deep breath before knocking on the door, feeling a rare sense of nervousness. He wasn't sure how Emily would react to him showing up at her home, but he hoped she would understand why he had come. After a few moments, the door opened, and Emily stood in the doorway, surprised to see David standing there. "Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you doing here?" David offered a small smile. "I came to thank you, properly." Emily stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. "You didn't have to come all this way." David stepped inside, taking in the modest interior of the home. It was clean and well kept, but it was clear that Emily and her mother were living with limited means. There were signs of wear on the furniture, and the air was filled with the faint scent of herbal tea. It was a far cry from the world David normally inhabited, and it made him appreciate even more the struggles Emily had faced. Emily led him to the small living room, where they sat on an old, faded couch. She looked at him curiously, clearly unsure of what to expect. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," David began, his tone sincere. "And I realized that if you hadn't spoken up that day, I would have lost everything. You didn't have to get involved, but you did. And that means more to me than I can put into words." Emily shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to being the focus of such attention. "I just did what anyone would have done," she said quietly. "I couldn't let him do that to you." David shook his head. "No, not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have stayed quiet, thinking it wasn't their place. But you didn't. You took a risk, and you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Emily's cheeks flushed slightly at the praise, but she remained humble. "I just did what I thought was right." David smiled at her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Well, I want to repay you for that. I know from our conversations that you had to give up school to take care of your mother. I'd like to help you finish your education if that's something you're still interested in." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "You mean, you'd help me go back to school?" David nodded. "I know you have a passion for economics, and I think you have a lot of potential. I want to make sure you get the opportunity to finish what you started. And if you're interested, I'd also like to offer you a position at my company. You've already shown you have good instincts, and I could use someone like you on my team." Emily stared at him, her emotions a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "This is more than I ever expected." David smiled warmly. "You've earned it. You helped me when you didn't have to. This is my way of saying thank you." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she blinked them away quickly, trying to keep her composure. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Sullivan. This means everything to me." David reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. Just take this opportunity and make the most of it. I believe in you." Emily nodded, still overwhelmed by the generosity of his offer. "I will. I promise." David stood up, feeling lighter now that he had repaid the debt he felt to Emily. As he walked to the door, he turned back to her. "I'll have my team reach out to you about the details. But for now, just focus on taking care of your mother and thinking about what you want to do next." Emily smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I'll never forget this." David gave her a final nod before stepping out into the cool evening air. As he walked back to his car, he felt a sense of closure. For the first time since Ryan's betrayal, he felt like he was truly moving forward. Emily's courage had changed everything for him, and now he had given her the chance to change her life as well. It wasn't just about repaying a debt. It was about helping someone who had helped him when he needed it most. And that, more than anything, gave David a sense of peace. The days following David's visit to Emily's home were a whirlwind of change for both of them. Emily spent much of her time thinking about the opportunity David had offered her. Going back to school had always been a distant dream ever since she had put her education on hold to care for her mother. Now that dream was suddenly within reach, and the possibility of working at David's company felt like a chance she had never even imagined. Despite her excitement, there was also hesitation. Emily had grown accustomed to keeping her head down and not drawing attention to herself. She had always been the kind of person who helped others quietly, without expecting anything in return. Now, she was being given the chance to step into a new world, and it both thrilled and terrified her. Meanwhile, David had already spoken with his team, ensuring that everything was in place for Emily to start at the company whenever she was ready. He wanted to give her time to think about her decision, knowing it wasn't something she could rush, but he was confident she would accept. He had seen the spark of ambition in her eyes, and he knew she was capable of great things. A week later, Emily made her decision. David was in his office, going over some paperwork, when his assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Sullivan, Emily Adams is here to see you." David felt a surge of anticipation. He had been waiting to hear from her. "Send her in." The door opened, and Emily stepped inside, looking a little nervous but determined. David stood up, offering her a warm smile. "Emily, it's good to see you," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "How are you feeling?" Emily sat down, clasping her hands together in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about your offer," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "And I've decided that I want to accept it. Both the chance to go back to school and the position at your company." David's smile broadened. "I'm glad to hear that. I knew you'd make the right choice." Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It's a little overwhelming, to be honest. I never thought I'd be in a position like this." David nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I know it's a big step, but you've already proven you have what it takes. You've got great instincts, and with your background in economics, you'll bring a fresh perspective to the team. And as for school, we'll make sure you have the flexibility to balance both." Emily gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I really appreciate this." David leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but encouraging. "I want you to know that this isn't just about repaying a favor. I see real potential in you, Emily. You've already shown you can handle difficult situations with grace and intelligence. I'm confident that with the right support, you'll thrive here." Emily felt a swell of emotion at his words. She had always been a hard worker, but no one had ever shown this level of belief in her before. It was both inspiring and daunting, but David's confidence in her gave her the strength to push through her doubts. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice filled with determination. David smiled again, clearly pleased. "I have no doubt about that. We'll get started on the paperwork for your school enrollment, and in the meantime, we can begin integrating you into the company. You'll have a mentor assigned to help you get settled, and I'll be here to guide you whenever you need." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. She was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one that held endless possibilities. The fear was still there, but so was the excitement. After they finished discussing the details of her new role and her school plans, Emily stood to leave. She felt lighter, as though a huge burden had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she was allowing herself to dream again. As she reached the door, she turned back to David. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for everything." David gave her a kind smile. "You've earned this, Emily. Welcome to the team." Over the next few weeks, Emily began her new journey. The transition from waitress to corporate employee was daunting at first, but David's company was a supportive environment. Her co-workers were welcoming, and her mentor, a woman named Sandra, took her under her wing immediately. Sandra was patient, knowledgeable, and always ready to answer Emily's questions, no matter how small. At first, Emily struggled with the learning curve. The corporate world was vastly different from the café, with its complex hierarchies, financial reports, and strategic planning sessions. But with each passing day, Emily became more confident. She absorbed everything like a sponge, applying her background in economics to her work and impressing her colleagues with her keen insights. David, meanwhile, kept a watchful eye on her progress. He could see that she was thriving, and it gave him a sense of satisfaction to know he had been right about her potential. Emily was more than just the waitress who had saved him from a disastrous deal. She was proving to be a valuable asset to the company. In the background of all this, David's legal team continued to work through the fallout from Ryan's betrayal. The company's accounts were secure, and Ryan's offshore funds had been frozen, but there was still much to untangle. David knew the process would be long and exhausting, but with Emily's help, he felt more prepared to handle whatever came next. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, Emily found herself staying late, working on a project for Sandra. The office was quiet, most of the employees having gone home for the day. As she sat at her desk reviewing financial reports, she felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in a long time. She was where she was meant to be. Just as she was packing up to leave, David walked by her desk, surprised to see her still there. "Emily, you're still here?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Emily looked up, smiling. "Just finishing up some work for Sandra." David chuckled. "You don't have to burn the midnight oil every night, you know?" Emily shrugged, her smile widening. "I don't mind. I actually enjoy it." David leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a moment. "You're doing great work, Emily. I hope you know that." Emily felt a flush of pride at his words. "Thanks, Mr. Sullivan. That means a lot coming from you." David nodded, then straightened up. "Well, don't stay too late. You need time for yourself, too." Emily smiled and nodded as David walked away. She watched him go, feeling a sense of gratitude for the opportunity he had given her and for the faith he had placed in her. As she finally gathered her things and headed for the door, she couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to accomplish, and for the first time in a long time, Emily truly believed that she could achieve it all. Emily's days at the company began to fall into a rhythm. She would arrive early, eager to tackle the challenges that awaited her, and leave late, constantly striving to learn and improve. She was determined to make the most of the opportunity David had given her, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. Over the next few weeks, her contributions to the company became more significant, and she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues. Her mentor, Sandra, continued to guide her through the complexities of corporate finance and operations. Under Sandra's tutelage, Emily became proficient at analyzing financial reports, identifying potential issues, and suggesting solutions that no one else had considered. Her fresh perspective, combined with her natural intelligence, made her stand out. Sandra was impressed with how quickly Emily was adapting. "You've got a real talent for this, Emily," she said one afternoon as they reviewed a particularly complicated financial forecast. "It's like you've been doing this for years." Emily smiled, feeling the familiar rush of pride that came whenever someone acknowledged her hard work. "I guess I'm just motivated to prove myself." "You don't need to prove anything," Sandra replied. "You've already shown you belong here. The work you've done so far has been exceptional." Emily was grateful for Sandra's encouragement. She had spent so much of her life doubting herself, always feeling like she was one step behind everyone else. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was on equal footing, capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. The corporate world was still a far cry from her old life as a waitress, but Emily had found her footing. Her background in economics allowed her to see things from a unique angle, and she often brought ideas to the table that others hadn't considered. More and more, David began to rely on her insights during strategy meetings, asking for her opinion on key decisions and listening to her suggestions with genuine interest. One day, David called Emily into his office for a private meeting. She entered, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. Although they had developed a comfortable working relationship, she still felt a sense of awe around him. After all, he was the man who had not only given her a second chance, but had trusted her enough to let her thrive in his company. "Emily," David began, leaning back in his chair as he gestured for her to sit. "I've been reviewing your work over the past few weeks, and I have to say, I'm impressed." Emily's heart raced. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I've been trying to do my best." David smiled. "You've done more than that. You've brought a fresh perspective to the team, and your ability to identify issues before they become problems has saved us more than once. You have a real gift for this." Emily felt a rush of gratitude. "That means a lot coming from you." David's smile grew wider. I'm glad to hear that. I've been thinking about how we can further develop your role here. You've already proven yourself capable of handling more responsibility, and I'd like to see you take on a leadership position. Emily blinked in surprise. A leadership position? David nodded. Yes. I want to put you in charge of a new project we're launching, an expansion into a new market. You'd be working directly with me to develop the strategy, analyze the financials, and oversee the implementation. It's a big step, but I think you're ready for it. Emily's mind raced. A leadership position. She had only been at the company for a short time, and now David was asking her to take on such a significant role. It was both thrilling and terrifying. I don't know what to say, she stammered. I'm honored, but are you sure I'm ready for something like this? David leaned forward, his expression serious but encouraging. I wouldn't offer it to you if I didn't think you were ready. You've earned this, Emily. You have the skills, the vision, and the work ethic to make this project a success. Emily hesitated for a moment, still processing the enormity of the opportunity. But as she looked into David's eyes, she realized that he truly believed in her. His faith in her abilities gave her the confidence she needed to say yes. I'd be honored to take on the project, Emily said, her voice filled with determination. I won't let you down. David smiled, satisfied with her response. I know you won't. We'll start planning next week, but in the meantime, take the weekend to relax. You've earned it. Emily nodded, her mind still spinning from the conversation. As she left David's office, she couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. She had just been given the chance to lead a major project, something she had never imagined happening so soon. It was an incredible responsibility, but she was ready to take it on. Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into preparations for the new project. She worked closely with David and Sandra, gathering data, analyzing market trends, and developing a comprehensive strategy. The project was ambitious. It involved expanding the company's reach into international markets, a move that could significantly increase their revenue but also came with its own set of challenges. Emily quickly realized that this was no small task. There were countless variables to consider, from local regulations to cultural differences to financial risks. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt energized. Every day was a new challenge, and she thrived in the fast-paced environment. As the project progressed, Emily began to see the bigger picture of how the company operated on a global scale. She was learning more than she ever had in school, and with David's guidance, she felt more confident in her decisions. David's trust in her never wavered, and their working relationship grew stronger as they navigated the complexities of the expansion together. One evening, after a long day of meetings, David pulled Emily aside. They were standing by the large windows in the office, overlooking the city as the sun set behind the skyscrapers. I wanted to tell you something, Emily, David said, his tone more serious than usual. Emily looked at him, curious. What is it? David paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. I've been thinking a lot about the past few months and everything we've been through. Ryan's betrayal, the work we've done to protect the company, and this new project. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Emily blinked, taken aback by his words. I'm just doing my part, Mr. Sullivan. David shook his head. No, you've done more than that. You've proven that you're not just another employee. You're a leader, and I want you to know how much I appreciate that. Emily felt a swell of emotion. She had never expected this when she first warned David about Ryan, but now she was standing here, shoulder to shoulder with him, helping to shape the future of the company. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. Thank you, she said softly. That means a lot to me. David smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. I know I've said this before, but you've earned everything that's come your way, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we accomplish together. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt truly capable of handling them. Together, they turned to watch the sunset, knowing that a new chapter was just beginning. The expansion project that Emily was leading was moving ahead faster than expected. Under her leadership and David's guidance, the company was making significant strides toward breaking into the international market. Every day brought new challenges, but Emily embraced them, confident in her abilities and the support she had from her team. However, not everything was smooth sailing. Just as Emily and David were beginning to feel the momentum of their success, an unexpected issue arose. Ryan. David hadn't heard from Ryan since their last confrontation, and he had assumed that Ryan had left the city quietly. The legal battles were ongoing, but David had largely put his former friend out of his mind. That was until one morning when he arrived at the office to find a grim-faced security officer waiting outside his door. "Mr. Sullivan, I think you should see this," the officer said, handing David a sealed envelope. David frowned as he took the envelope, his name printed neatly across the front. He could feel something heavy inside, a USB drive. He opened it carefully, sliding the small device out and holding it in his hand. "Where did this come from?" David asked. "It was delivered to the front desk this morning," the officer explained. "No return address, just your name." David's mind raced. It had been months since Ryan's betrayal, and while his legal team was handling the frozen accounts and the fallout, David had largely moved on. But now, seeing the envelope and the mysterious USB drive, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to Ryan. "Thanks," David said quietly, dismissing the officer. He quickly made his way into his office, locking the door behind him. He sat at his desk, staring at the USB drive in his hand, wondering if he should open it or contact Julian, his investigator, first. After a moment of deliberation, David plugged the drive into his computer. A single video file popped up on the screen. Heart pounding, he clicked on it, and the video began to play. The grainy footage showed Ryan sitting in what looked like a hotel room. He wore a smug expression, leaning back in his chair as he addressed the camera directly. "David." Ryan's voice filled the room, dripping with disdain. "By now, you're probably thinking you've won. You froze my accounts, cut me off from the company, and ruined everything I worked for. But here's the thing. You didn't destroy me. Not by a long shot." David clenched his jaw, anger rising in his chest as Ryan's words filled his ears. "I've still got cards to play," Ryan continued, his smirk widening. "And I've been busy since our little fallout. You think you can just take everything from me and walk away clean? I don't think so. I've been gathering information that could destroy you, your company, and everything you've built. You might have caught me off guard last time, but now, I'm prepared." David's hands tightened into fists as Ryan's words struck home. What kind of information did Ryan have? Was it real? Or was this just another one of his manipulative ploys? Ryan leaned closer to the camera, his expression darkening. "I've made connections, David. Powerful ones. And I'm not just talking about the business world. You might want to check the headlines soon. Let's just say, when the media gets a hold of what I have, your precious reputation will be in tatters." The video ended abruptly, leaving David staring at the screen in stunned silence. His mind raced. What could Ryan possibly have on him? David had always been cautious, making sure his dealings were above board, but Ryan was resourceful. If he had managed to dig up something damaging, even if it wasn't true, the mere implication could ruin everything. David sat back in his chair, breathing heavily as the reality of the situation set in. Ryan was back, and this time, he was playing dirty. The legal battles had been one thing, but now, Ryan was threatening to destroy David's reputation through the media. It was a new kind of warfare, one that could unravel everything David had built, both personally and professionally. Without wasting any more time, David grabbed his phone and dialed Julian. "Julian, it's David. We've got a problem," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "What's going on?" Julian asked, immediately picking up on David's tone. "It's Ryan. He just sent me a video, and he's threatening to go public with something. Says he's been gathering information on me, and he's planning to leak it to the media." Julian was silent for a moment. Then his voice came through the line, calm and focused. "All right, don't panic. We need to handle this carefully. First, send me the video. I'll have my team analyze it and see if there's any way to trace where it was filmed. We need to find out where Ryan is and what he's really planning." David nodded, even though Julian couldn't see him. "I'll send it over right away." "Good. In the meantime, don't engage with him. He's trying to provoke a reaction. And the more calm and calculated we are, the better chance we have of stopping him before he does any real damage." David hung up the phone and immediately sent the video to Julian. He leaned back in his chair, trying to steady his breathing. Ryan was dangerous, and now, more than ever, David needed to be one step ahead. But this wasn't just about business anymore. Ryan was out for revenge, and he wasn't going to stop until David was ruined. As the hours passed, David worked closely with his legal team and Julian's investigators to prepare for whatever Ryan might throw at him. But despite their efforts, there was no way to predict exactly what Ryan had planned. The uncertainty gnawed at David, making it hard to focus on anything else. Later that evening, as David sat in his office, Emily knocked on the door. "David?" she asked softly, stepping inside when he waved her in. "I heard there's something going on. Are you all right?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's Ryan. He's back, and he's threatening to go public with something damaging. I don't know what he has, but it could be bad." Emily's face fell, her expression filled with concern. "I thought he was gone for good." "So did I," David replied, his voice tight. "But apparently, I underestimated him." Emily sat down across from him, her eyes searching his face. "Is there anything I can do to help?" David looked at her, feeling a surge of gratitude for her loyalty. She had been by his side through everything, and now, more than ever, he needed people he could trust. "Just keep doing what you've been doing," David said finally. "I'm handling it, but I might need your support if this gets worse." Emily nodded, her expression resolute. "You can count on me, David. Whatever happens, we'll get through it together." David gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Emily. That means a lot." As Emily left the office, David leaned back in his chair, staring out at the darkened city skyline. Ryan might have come back with a vengeance, but David wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. He was ready for whatever came next. The tension in the air was thick in the days following Ryan's threat. David had barely slept, his mind consumed with worry over what Ryan might have in store. Every morning, he checked the news, bracing himself for a potential bombshell. But so far, there had been nothing. It was as if Ryan was playing a waiting game, letting the anticipation gnaw away at David's nerves. Julian and his team worked tirelessly to gather as much information as possible. They managed to trace the video back to a small, nondescript hotel on the outskirts of the city. Julian had dispatched a team to investigate, but Ryan had already checked out by the time they arrived. "He's being careful," Julian said during one of their daily calls. "He's not staying in one place for too long, which means he knows we're looking for him." David's frustration mounted as the days passed without any sign of resolution. Ryan had vanished again, but the threat of his next move loomed over everything. Even in the office, the usual rhythm of work felt disrupted. Emily, ever the steady hand, kept things running smoothly, but she could see the strain on David's face. One evening, as David sat alone in his office, scrolling through the endless reports from Julian's team, his phone buzzed on the desk. It was Julian. "We've got something," Julian said, his tone serious but tinged with relief. Ryan slipped up. David sat up straighter, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "One of our guys managed to intercept a message Ryan sent to a media contact. He's been trying to sell a story about you, but it's all built on lies. He's fabricating details, mixing in half-truths, and it seems like he's desperate to get something published before anyone can verify the facts. David felt a wave of both relief and anger. So Ryan's evidence wasn't legitimate. It was a smear campaign. He was trying to ruin David's reputation through deception. "What's the story?" David asked, dreading the answer. He's spinning a narrative about financial misconduct, saying you've been involved in illegal deals with foreign companies and that you've been using offshore accounts to hide profits. It's all smoke and mirrors, but he's trying to make it sound credible. David exhaled slowly, the knot in his stomach loosening just slightly. "Can we stop him?" "We're already on it," Julian assured him. "I've contacted the media outlets he's been talking to, and we're getting ahead of the story. We've got our own narrative, backed by facts, ready to go. Once we present the real story about Ryan's betrayal, the stolen funds, the offshore accounts he was using, it'll completely discredit anything he tries to say about you." David nodded, feeling some of the weight lifting off his shoulders. "What about Ryan? Can we stop him from trying this again?" "That's the other part of the good news," Julian said. "We've got enough evidence now to take legal action. Between the frozen accounts, the financial records we've uncovered, and this latest attempt to smear you, we've built a solid case. I've already spoken to your legal team, and they're ready to move forward. Ryan's running out of options." David leaned back in his chair, the tension that had been gripping him for days finally beginning to ease. "So this is it. We can finally put an end to this." Julian's voice was firm. "Yes, we're shutting him down, legally and publicly." The call ended, and David sat in silence for a few moments, letting the relief wash over him. Ryan had come at him with everything he had, but in the end, his lies had unraveled. David had weathered the storm, and now the tables were turning. Later that evening, David met with his legal team to finalize their strategy. They were going to file a lawsuit against Ryan for defamation, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. It was the final nail in the coffin for Ryan's schemes. He wouldn't be able to hide behind his lies any longer. As the legal wheels began to turn, David felt a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't just about protecting himself anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had betrayed him in the worst possible way. Ryan had tried to destroy him, but David wasn't going to let him get away with it. The following morning, the news broke. David's legal team had issued a statement to the press detailing Ryan's actions, the financial misconduct, the theft, the attempt to frame David. The media quickly picked up the story, and within hours, Ryan's name was splashed across headlines as the villain in a corporate scandal. David watched from his office as the news unfolded, feeling a sense of vindication. Ryan had tried to destroy his reputation, but now, the truth was out, and it was Ryan who would be facing the consequences. Emily knocked softly on his door and stepped inside, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "I saw the news," she said quietly. "It looks like everything's finally coming to light." David nodded, his gaze still on the screen. "It's over, at least the worst of it. Ryan's going to have to face the consequences of what he's done." Emily moved closer, standing by his desk. "You've been through a lot these past few months. I'm just glad you came out on top." David glanced up at her, grateful for her steady presence. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emily. You've been by my side through all of this." Emily smiled, her eyes softening. "I'm just glad I could help." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past few months finally starting to lift. Ryan's threats had been neutralized, and David could finally begin to focus on the future. But as he looked at Emily, he realized that the future wasn't just about business anymore. "You've been more than just a help," David said, his voice quieter now. "You've become someone I rely on, someone I trust." Emily's expression softened further, and she gave a small nod. "I feel the same way." David smiled at her, feeling a warmth that had been missing for so long. "I think we make a pretty good team." Emily laughed softly. "I think so too." The tension of the past few weeks slowly melted away, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. Ryan had tried to tear them apart, but instead, he had strengthened the bond between them. David stood up, extending his hand to Emily. "Let's get back to work. We've got a lot to look forward to." Emily took his hand, smiling. "Absolutely." Together, they stepped out of the office, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. With Ryan's defeat behind them, the company began to settle back into its regular rhythm. The media had moved on to the next big story, and the legal battles surrounding Ryan were well underway. David felt a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible just a few weeks before. The storm had passed, and now he could focus on what truly mattered, the future of his company and the people who had stood by him through it all. Emily continued to excel in her new leadership role. The expansion project she had been tasked with was nearing completion, and every day she proved that David's trust in her had been well placed. Her attention to detail, her sharp analytical skills, and her ability to see beyond the surface made her an invaluable asset to the team. Everyone in the company had come to respect her, not just because she was smart and hardworking, but because she had shown courage and integrity when it mattered most. One afternoon, as Emily was wrapping up a meeting with the international team, David called her into his office. She entered with her usual smile, though she was still sometimes surprised by how much had changed in such a short time. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, taking a seat across from his desk. David leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through these past few months," he began, his voice calm but serious. "And I realize that I owe you more than just a thank you." Emily tilted her head slightly, unsure of where the conversation was going. "You've already done so much, David. I don't expect anything more." David smiled warmly. "That's just the thing. You've never expected anything, even though you've earned it. And that's what makes you special. You've gone above and beyond, not just for me, but for the company, and I think it's time we recognize that." Emily's eyes widened slightly, a sense of anticipation building inside her. "I want to offer you a permanent leadership role," David continued, his voice steady and sincere. "You've proven that you're capable of handling high-level responsibilities, and I think it's time for you to have a seat at the executive table. I'd like you to become part of the senior management team, overseeing our international operations." Emily blinked, her heart racing. "You mean, you want me to take on a permanent leadership role?" David nodded. "Yes, you've shown me and everyone else in this company that you're more than qualified. You've been instrumental in helping us expand, and I can't think of anyone better suited for this position." For a moment, Emily was speechless. She had started out as a waitress, warning David about a betrayal she had overheard, never expecting anything in return. And now, here she was, being offered one of the most prestigious positions in the company. "I don't know what to say," she finally whispered, overwhelmed with emotion. "This is more than I ever imagined." David smiled, leaning forward. "You've earned every bit of it. And I want you to know that this isn't just about what you've done for me personally. It's about what you've brought to this company. The ideas, the innovation, the leadership. You've made us better, Emily." Tears pricked the corners of Emily's eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. "I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. I'll do everything I can to live up to it." "I have no doubt that you will," David said with a warm smile. "And don't worry, you won't be doing it alone. We'll be working together closely, just like we have been. I'm excited to see what we can accomplish." Emily nodded, her heart full of gratitude. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now she felt like everything was finally falling into place. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was her future, her career, and her chance to make a real difference. As she stood to leave, David stopped her with a gentle smile. "There's one more thing." Emily turned back, curious. "We're having a celebration next week," David explained. "It's for the entire company to celebrate the success of the expansion project. But I also want to take that opportunity to officially announce your new role to everyone." Emily's heart fluttered at the thought. She had always been someone who preferred to work behind the scenes, but now she was being asked to step into the spotlight. It was daunting, but also exciting. "I'd be honored," she said softly, feeling a swell of pride. David stood up, extending his hand to her. Then it settled. "Welcome to the leadership team, Emily." Emily shook his hand, smiling through her tears. "Thank you, David, for everything." The celebration came quickly, and the atmosphere at the company was electric. The event was held in a grand ballroom, with all the employees in attendance, from the newest hires to the senior management team. There was an air of excitement and pride, knowing that the company had weathered the storm of Ryan's betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. David took the stage, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. He spoke about the challenges they had faced, the success of the expansion, and the bright future ahead for the company. As he spoke, Emily stood off to the side, feeling a sense of awe at how far they had come. "And now," David said, his voice carrying through the room, "I'd like to recognize someone who has played a crucial role in our success, someone who has shown extraordinary courage, intelligence, and leadership. Emily Adams." The room erupted into applause as David gestured for Emily to join him on stage. Her heart raced as she walked up, her hands trembling slightly, but she held her head high. This was her moment. "Emily has been a key part of our success," David continued. "And today, I'm proud to announce that she will be taking on a permanent leadership role, overseeing our international operations as part of our senior management team." The applause grew louder, and Emily felt a surge of pride and gratitude. She had worked hard to get here, but she couldn't have done it alone. David had given her the chance, and now she was determined to make the most of it. As she took the microphone, she looked out at the sea of faces, many of whom had become her friends and colleagues over the past few months. "I just want to say thank you," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "To David, to the team, and to everyone who has supported me along the way. I never imagined I'd be standing here today, but I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm excited to continue working with all of you to make this company even better." The applause rang out again, and Emily smiled, feeling the warmth and support of everyone around her. This was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Emily settled into her new role, quickly proving herself as an effective and respected leader. David, as always, was by her side, guiding her when needed but trusting her to make decisions on her own. Their partnership grew stronger with each passing day, and together, they led the company into a new era of success. As Emily walked through the office one evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, she paused for a moment to take it all in. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but she had made it. She had found her place, and as she looked out over the city skyline, she knew that this was only the beginning of a bright and promising future.